tell people, I think, especially in the group, but in general, people who do dietas, many of them are doing dietas because they too want to be healers, curanderos, and this is what they were told. If you want to learn how to be a curandero, you do dietas. So they do it for their own healing, but I think it's at least a thought in people's minds that, hey, maybe this is something I want to do. Um, but I guess, what have you seen that are the biggest barriers for people? Because certainly there's people that even do dietas for a long time, but maybe it's not helping them. Maybe they get stuck. So, what are some of the challenges or obstacles that you see Westerners going through that kind of prevents them on this
Good
process?
question. 2 words: goal orientation. This kind of seeking to attain something outside of you, another benchmark, another stripe on the tiger, something else that is an acquisition kind of mentality, something that is acquired. All of that is definitely a detriment to actually allowing one's own unique process to unfold in its own space and time, without the expectation of, oh, well, I've done this many dietas, I should have graduated to this point by now, or whatever that kind of goal-oriented mentality is. We need to put that to rest, basically. Every time that arises, we need to put that to rest. So for example, personally, when I first started to get really serious about this work about 18 years ago, that was my goal. I wanted to lead ceremonies, right? Of course, I was doing a lot of healing on myself, but like you said, that was definitely something like, oh, when am I? And so I had the question in my mind, Michael, for the burning question: when am I going to be ready? When am I going to feel ready? It was always in my mind for like the longest time, right? And so I've gone through such like processes with the ceremonies. I mean, I went through years where it was disagreeable. It kind of sucked. and during that time, there were groups that would come here, and there were times where I had to like drag myself to the Maloka because I was just like, I don't want to do this because it's going to suck. I'm going to feel pain mentally, emotionally, physically, whatever that is. And also, as a facilitator, you're dealing with not just your own expectations, you're dealing with the expectations of everybody else upon you and what you should be doing, okay? And it's very subtle, but it's very palpable, okay? And so there's a lot of digging yourself out from under all of this. And so I went through this whole kind of process where I went from really wanting to do this and when am I going to be ready, to kind of like letting go of that and being like, that's all right. I don't know if this is for me or not. And to be honest, I felt like that's a lot of responsibility, and maybe I don't really need to take that responsibility on. So I kind of like let it go. And for a long time, I sat co-pilot, and I was very comfortable with that. And then what happened was my daughter was born. And I guess in essence, I could say that my daughter graduated me. But once my daughter was born, then sitting co-pilot was no longer an option for me because somebody was home with the baby. And so I actually, for the first time in maybe almost 20 years, I took an extended sabbatical from ayahuasca. I stopped drinking. And that was a very interesting process too, because part of me was like, you can't stop drinking. You have to keep going. And I had to analyze, well, where's that idea coming from? This idea that I need to keep plugging away at it. Like, am I going to be behind? Behind what? Like, who am I competing with? Like, this is crazy. So I let it all go, and besides, I had really formed a kind of identity with this. And so I just let it all go. And I tried to, and becoming a mother was like probably one of the biggest initiations of my entire life. And so the first time I drank after having my daughter, she was probably about 5 months old, and it was just me. And I drank and I stayed with her the whole night. And Michael, I had this experience with her where, she was nursing. And so at one point she was nursing, and I felt like her body kind of tense up. And I felt, oh my goodness, intuitively, I felt like she feels the medicine right now through the milk. And it was like, yeah. So it was like, as a baby, it was like she, in a moment, it was like, it started to like affect her. And so when you, like, a mother and a child, I think is probably one of the most intimate relationships that can possibly exist ever. And there's definitely so much possibility for telepathic communication to unfold. And so, not with words, but just energetically, telepathically, I let her know what this was and that it was okay. And immediately she relaxed, the body relaxed. And it was like we were both surfing the waves of the mareacion together. And this may be somewhat of a controversial video. I'm wondering how people are going to be receiving this. But anyway, I'm just going to explain my experience. And so in a moment, the separation between me and Nahal totally dissolved. The separation between my body and the room where we were in totally dissolved. And it was complete, pure oneness, all of it, and we just were like, the consciousness, our individual consciousness, were able to kind of link up with this like anthropos blueprint, and we just were one with all that is. And so that was my reintroduction to the work since I had stepped away with it. And ever since then, the question of, am I ready to guide, didn't exist anymore. It just was an irrelevant question at that point. And so, I would say I learn so much every time I learn so much from every ceremony, but especially when I'm guiding other people in ceremony, I learn so much about myself. There's so much that I'm unraveling in terms of, what's my role in all of this? What am I really here to do? And all I can tell you is I seek to detach myself as far from the mental field, as far from the I as I possibly can, and just really allow myself to be completely absorbed by the experience, and what comes through, what comes through to come through, right? And also with the participants, to allow what comes through them to come through, even if in certain moments there's a part of me that might feel like triggered in terms of like fear and anxiety, like, whoa, okay, I can see where this is going. Like, we call it rayado. Rayado means like when somebody gets cruzado, like when somebody gets crossed. And so you can see that they get to a point with the medicine where they can't even hear you anymore. And they may start doing things that can be kind of intense, like their bodies might move uncontrollably, they might scream, all that kind of stuff might happen. And so as a facilitator, that can trigger some kind of anxiety and fear because, on some kind of level, the I feels responsible, right? Well, obviously, you are to an extent somewhat responsible for this person, even though I don't really believe that, Michael. We are all responsible for ourselves, but to some degree, it is up to me to make sure that this person does not make harm to themselves or somebody else, So on some level, there is like some mental activity that's there that's kind of measuring or ascertaining, like, okay, at what point do I need to step in? And when I step in, what is it that needs to be done? But ultimately, and I see that this happens when I'm not really familiar with the person and the person's not really familiar with me and my way of working and with the medicine. Typically, what happens with people who I am familiar working with is that we just all completely surrender to the experience, and the expectation on the facilitator and the participant and the separation tends to kind of dissolve, and we can really kind of dive very deeply, if you may, into the experience beyond like, oh, the facilitator who's healing and using her shakapa and her ikaros, and she's using her singing bowl, and now she's, smudging with this plant or whatever, which I love. And those are tools that I love very dearly. But ultimately, I'm looking to access something that is beyond the mental field. And so if I'm looking to go beyond the mental field, the idea that I'm going to be walking and talking, never mind like singing and doing things, it's beyond that. It's beyond that. And that's really where I'm looking to go when I work with the medicine, is I'm looking to go beyond any kind of mental field, because Michael, we spend most of our waking and sleeping time in the mental field. I don't know about you, but I'm very tired of that. And there's something beyond that. And I'm interested in spending time there, because when I do access those places beyond time, beyond space, beyond me remembering my name or my identity, in that space, it is deeply rejuvenating, deeply recalibrating, healing that is beyond what I can mentally even grasp. I've had some really incredible healings in this life working with these plants. Yeah.